Greetings, JC here for Interface. Let me ask you a question. If you had to go out and buy a new computer tomorrow, let's say that your current system crashed and you had no choice but to get new hardware, what operating system would you choose? Well, if you're a Windows user, the only operating system you're left with is Windows 7 because Windows XP and Windows Vista have been phased out. Well, that answers that question. Or does it? Well, you could always go and get a Mac and switch to OS X. Or you could even opt to run Linux. However, what do you do if you find yourself in a situation where you want to run more than one operating system at a time on your machine? At this point, you might be asking yourself this question. Why would I want to run more than one operating system on my computer? I mean, isn't one good enough? Well, let me give you this scenario. Let's say that you're a long-time Windows XP user. You never upgraded to Vista, and all of a sudden your computer dies. So you go out and buy a new computer, and you end up with Windows 7, which is the latest version of Windows. Windows 7 is definitely a groovy operating system. However, you find out that some of the programs and games that you used on Windows XP simply are not compatible with Windows 7. Even though you upgrade to the Windows 7 Professional version, which offers extended XP compatibility, you still can't run some of these games and some of this software. This leaves you with two choices. Either you search for upgrades to your software and games, many of which do not exist at this point in time, or you figure out a way to run Windows XP on your computer. Most computer users are familiar with the concept of dual booting a machine. This means that there are two operating systems living on the same hard drive. They're just in different partitions. When the computer starts up, it asks you which operating system you want to go into for this session. Well, in our scenario, this would definitely give us our XP compatibility. That is, if we can get it to work. Some modern machines simply are not compatible with Windows XP, and it will not load properly. And even if it does, it's difficult to find all the drivers to make all of the hardware function properly. So setting up a dual boot, especially between two versions of Windows, is a daunting task. The other disadvantage to dual booting a machine is the fact that once you dual boot into an operating system, you're stuck there for the entire session. So let's say we were able to set up our computer to run Windows XP and Windows 7 at the same time. That would mean that to get into Windows XP, we would have to restart the computer, boot up Windows XP, wait for it to stabilize, and then we could do whatever we wanted in Windows XP. But let's say we wanted to jump over to Windows 7 for one reason or the other. Well, it's not that easy. You'd have to shut down Windows XP, restart the computer, choose Windows 7, and wait for it to stabilize. Wouldn't it be better if we had both operating systems running at the same time? But wait, you can't do that, can you? Yes, you can. And I'm going to show you how. Here's what it looks like. You're looking at a screen capture of VMware Workstation 7.1 running on Windows 7. And within VMware Workstation, we're running a virtual machine of Windows XP. VMware has long been the leader in virtualization technology. Although there are open source alternatives to VMware like VirtualBox, you're going to find more compatibility with more operating systems with VMware, plus you get great support and automatic updates of your VMware software for as long as you have it. VMware Workstation 7.1 is the latest version of VMware that allows you to run guest operating systems within Windows. If you have a Mac, you'll need to download VMware Fusion, which allows you to run guest operating systems in OS X. The software isn't cheap, currently going for $189. However, it is definitely worth it, especially if you plan to be doing lots of work with lots of different operating systems. Even if you only intend to run one operating system, VMware is going to give you more stability than the open source alternatives. Now that we've downloaded and installed our copy of VMware Workstation 7, 0.1, we can get going here. Now, I already have a machine loaded up, as this is a pre-installed version. However, we're going to concentrate on putting a new machine in. First of all, a couple of things that you might want to do before you jump into anything else. First thing that you want to do is to go to your menu bar here and right-click to choose what toolbars you see. In this case, I only have the display toolbar up. However, you can choose to look at the power option, which gives you buttons that are analogous to the on, off, and suspend buttons you see on a real computer. You can turn on the snapshot feature, which allows you to take a snapshot of a virtual machine. This is sort of like System Restore in the Windows operating system, where you set a restore point and then you can go back to it if you want to. You can also turn on the replay option. This allows you to record what an operating system is doing running in VMware and be able to play that back. This is useful for debugging software. However, since I'm not going to be debugging any software, I can go ahead and turn that off. I also do not need the snapshot feature, and I don't need the power buttons. The only thing I need to see is the display. And yes, all of those toolbars will combine along with the menu bar after a while, so it doesn't stay that way forever. It just takes it a little while to catch up. So let's go ahead and look at some other things that we're going to want to check as far as settings are concerned. Go into preferences here. The first thing we want to look at is memory. And this is the amount of memory that the virtual machines will get from the host operating system. Here we can set an upper limit. I've set it for 3 gigs. This is a 4 gig system, and I do not want it to be allowed to page to the page file in Windows. The other thing you're going to want to look at is where your machines are going to be stored. Virtual machines are stored as files called VMDK files. We'll talk a little bit more about that. It's a virtual hard drive. So let's do a typical installation of a virtual machine. Choose Create Virtual Machine from the Home tab here. We'll do a typical installation, which means that VMware is going to select the settings for us to get us started. First of all, we need to choose where we're going to get our machine from. Our host operating, or rather our guest operating system, will be installed either from a DVD or CD, or you can do it from an ISO image file. Most operating systems on the web are available as ISO downloads. So let's choose one. I have Ubuntu 10.04 here, which would be a popular operating system to install in a VM, and we'll go ahead and do that. And it says here that the operating system will use easy install, which is going to make it go even quicker. So we'll go ahead and do that. Now with easy install, we put all of our information in before we get started. So let's go ahead and stick a name in here, and we'll choose the username Joe, and I'll give it a password. This is the same thing you do with an regular Ubuntu install. Give it a password to work with, and off we go. And now it's going to suggest a name, which in this case is going to be Ubuntu. That's fine. At this stage, it's going to ask us about our virtual hard disk that we'll be creating on the host system's hard drive. And it'll ask us a couple of questions like size. You can choose whatever you want. The recommended is 20 gigabytes. Here, it's going to ask us whether we want to use a single file or chop the hard drive up into smaller files. If you're using a FAT32 disk, for instance, to store the operating system on, then you can't have files over 4 gigs, and that would cause a problem. But in most cases, if you're using NTFS or ext4 and Linux as your host, or an Apple system, then you're not going to have any problems at all with a single file. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Okay, so we say that is fine, and it's going to give us the opportunity to go in here and look at our settings. First thing I want to change is I want to tell it that it has a dual core processor. The host has 3, so we can go in and change that. Now, the other thing that we can change is exactly how our guest operating system gets onto the internet. NAT, or Network Address Translation, means that the guest operating system is going to grab a IP address writing on the back of the hosts. This is the most reliable way of getting a guest operating system on the net. However, I like bridged because I have a router, and that means it will go out and get its own IP address. And the last thing that we want to check here is display, and we want to accelerate 3D graphics, which helps in the running of the system. So now that we're done, we can install the operating system. Here we go. It boots up the machine, the virtual machine, as you can see here, and it will begin installing the Ubuntu operating system from here. We're going to pause and let Ubuntu go through its installation process, and we'll come back and talk a bit more about what's going on toward the end. Our Ubuntu operating system is just about installed, and we are going to see the machine go through some different things as it installs here. One of the important things that it's going to do for us automatically is to install VMware tools into our operating system. VMware tools allow us to communicate with the operating system and do things like drag files from the host operating system's desktop. With a easy install, this is done automatically. If you do a manual install, you may have to manually install the VM tools. As you can see, Ubuntu is having those tools installed right now. That is actually not very hard to do, and instructions are available in the documentation on how to do that. So very shortly here, we should boot into our fresh install of Ubuntu. And now we've booted for the first time into our fresh installation of Ubuntu. So put the password in that you gave the system while we were installing, and we will boot right up. And there is Ubuntu running in a virtual machine inside of Windows 7. One of the things to keep in mind with your guest operating system is that the care and feeding of the operating system is exactly the same. With Windows, you're going to have to defrag your hard drives. You will have to install a antivirus program. As far as the internet is concerned, the Windows installation is another computer running on your network and is just as vulnerable to virus attack as a physical computer. Also, getting a virus in a virtual machine puts your host computer at risk, so go ahead and get some antivirus software. And of course, you must keep in mind that your Windows installation has to be a licensed installation and has to be a valid copy of Windows. So now we have Ubuntu and we have Windows XP running at the same time on our Windows 7 host computer. Here's a beautiful thing. Let's say that you install Ubuntu, you play around with it for a while, and you say to yourself, well, I really don't want to keep this operating system. Well, here's all you have to do. Shut down the operating system. Goodbye, Ubuntu. And to remove it from your VMware installation, it's really quite simple. Go up here to the VM menu and choose to delete from disk. It's gone, and it made no changes to your original host operating system. So there you go. It's an introduction to a wonderful product here. This is VMware Workstation 7.1, a very powerful tool in this modern age of computing when it's difficult sometimes to choose what operating system you want to run. You don't have to choose. You can run as many as you like. For Interface, I'm JC.